If you're a fan of Undertale and Deltarune, you may be aware that the games have an official Japanese localization. But how good is it? How do they handle all the wordplay, references, and unique speaking styles of the characters? Well, I can happily report that they do a fantastic job. There's actually a whole book from the Legends of Localization series that covers the translation of Undertale in depth. I would highly recommend giving that a read if you're interested. While plenty of devs would just hand the job off to some random company and trust their work without any testing or quality assurance, looking at you, Stray and Alan Wake 2, Toby Fox is amazing and actually was directly involved with the localization every step of the way. He took his Japanese studies more seriously to understand it better. He answered any questions the translators had. He provided tons of notes. He reviewed and approved everything. He even suggested some changes directly using what he knew of the language. Because of this, the translation retains his authorial intent and is practically as good as the English version. But today, we're going to be focusing on Deltarune. I'm pretty confident Deltarune will get a book of its own someday, but that will probably only be after it's fully completed. So I figured in the meantime I would document what I think are some of the most noteworthy details about the Japanese version of each chapter. This will be the first video, covering Chapter 1, so let's get into it. Our first stop is the Gonermaker sequence. In English, the narrator here speaks in all caps, in a formal tone. The Japanese reflects this by replacing all the hiragana with katakana. This is actually how Japanese used to be written before World War II, and it's sometimes used to give a formal, literary appearance to the text. At the end of the sequence, the style of the text shifts back to a more standard form, with hiragana and kanji. People often attribute this speaking style to Kara, since in Undertale they're the only ones who use kanji to this extent, while it's used sparingly for everyone else. This isn't necessarily true in the context of Deltarune though, but we'll get back to that a bit later. Next we have Suzie. She has the speaking style of a delinquent, with a bunch of contractions and use of slang. A notable example being her use of wata instead of wakatta. An interesting detail, which has no equivalent in the original English, is how she uses two different first-person pronouns depending on context. When she's being aggressive or tough, she uses the masculine ore, and in her softer and more genuine moments, she uses the feminine atashi. She uses atashi at first when she's acting calm while talking to Chris here, and switches to ore immediately after shoving them against the locker, and continues switching between them depending on her mood. This is a really nice touch that I think adds to her character. Now, in Undertale, Toby made a choice to minimize the use of kanji in order to mimic the appearance of older RPGs that couldn't display many kanji due to technical limitations. So, in Deltarune, this style carries over in the Light World, since it inherits all the other characteristics of Undertale. However, in the Dark Worlds, this no longer applies, and kanji are used a lot more freely. This adds additional contrast between the Light and Dark Worlds, and also addresses some of the readability concerns that some Japanese fans had with Undertale. This also brings us back to earlier with the Gonermaker sequence. If this is supposed to take place in the Light World, it would make sense to attribute the second narrator to Kara/Chris, but if it's meant to be a Dark World, it could apply to some Darkner, like perhaps Ralsei, who is not bound by the kanji limitations of most Lightners. Also, in Undertale, Kara consistently writes omae with kanji like this, but in this instance it's written without kanji, which could be an intentional hint that it's not actually them. Let's talk about Sham. There's a cute little pun they make that goes, "The name's Sham, pronounced Sham, and this is my little shop." How do they translate this? In Japanese, Sham's name is actually changed to Nui, a common shortening of Nuigurumi, meaning plushie or stuffed animal, and the pun is changed to the fact that Nui, in reverse, becomes Inu, meaning dog. Also worth noting is Sham uses the first-person pronoun atashi, which is seen as feminine and typically used by girls. Sham is supposed to have they-them pronouns like Chris, according to Toby, so you might expect them to use watashi or watakushi since it's more gender neutral. However, I think that wouldn't have gotten the point across. I think using atashi stands out more and further emphasizes the intentionally ambiguous nature of their gender, in my opinion. There's this moment where Suzie and Lancer are at this stump, and there's a couple lines that I was curious about. Well, has everyone had enough? Constantly. In Japanese, Lancer asks if everyone is full, or onakai ippai. And Suzie responds, yeah, I've been full a long time now. Onakai ippai can also have the figurative meaning of being tired of a certain topic, so ultimately the joke ends up being more or less the same, though it's less punchy here than the English one since she responds with a full sentence. You really shouldn't have pissed me off, man. It shouldn't have. This line only makes sense in English, so they had to change it a bit. Instead, she says, if you make me angry, you'll regret it later. To which Ralsei responds, you'll regret it later is grammatically incorrect. It's a tautology. In other words, regret already implies reflecting on the past, so saying you'll regret it later is redundant. In Japanese, the word for regret even contains the kanji for ato, meaning later, making this redundancy more apparent. When you encounter Starwalker, he says, these birds are pissing me off. You might expect this to be translated similarly to the way they handled the quiet people piss me off line from Suzie and King, where they used iratsuku. But actually it's completely different. They translated it as hedo ga deru. So this line is more like, these birds make me puke, or make me sick. I'm not sure why it's different, since iratsuku would work here just fine. The only thing I can think of is maybe Toby wants to do a callback to this line in a future chapter, and in order for the callback joke to work in Japanese, the original line needs to be phrased like this. Not sure though. Now, how on earth did they translate rules? His speech uses a mix of classical Japanese and English. Like, he refers to the group as Nanjisu. Nanji is an old pronoun for you, pretty much the Japanese equivalent of thou, except you might also notice the z in katakana at the end. That is the plural s from English. Yeah. He also inserts English words like but. He reminds me a lot of Pegasus from Yu-Gi-Oh! Not sure if that was intentional. He also uses the old first-person pronoun yo, which you might be familiar with if you've ever watched Nakiri Ayame. Now on to Jevil. In English, Jevil has a speech quirk where he repeats words. In Japanese, this is altered a bit, where he will say something, usually a question with a particle at the end, then repeat it with a different particle, usually affirming the question. His voice lines have also been redubbed. Take a listen. Finally, back in the light world, we can go to the hospital and find out about Des. Now, since December is pronounced December, her name is shortened to Dise. And that's pretty much it for Chapter 1. There's so much more to talk about in Chapter 2, but that will have to wait for next time. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. I'll be doing one of these for each chapter of the game as they come out. I also stream, so feel free to stop by and chat sometime. If there's anything in this chapter you're still curious about that I didn't cover, feel free to ask in the comments and I might reply or mention it in a future video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.